I'm Ava Morgan, 24 years old, a recent Harvard graduate with a degree in computer science. The story I'm about to tell you isn't just about a graduation gift, it's about the thin line between gratitude and humiliation, between being loved genuinely and being used under the name of family. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family just to be seen as a real person? And where are you watching this story from, so I know I'm not alone tonight? Harvard Yard gleamed under the crimson banners fluttering in the May wind. The drumbeats of commencement echoed through the clear blue sky, blending with cheers and the steady voice calling out each graduate's name. I walked beside Amelia, my twin sister, both of us in black gowns, square caps, and gold honor cords draped across our shoulders. From a distance, I saw Mom waving, her face glowing with pride. But her gaze lingered on Amelia a moment longer, as if the entire world had been created for that one daughter of hers. When we reached our parents, Mom rushed forward and wrapped Amelia in a tight embrace. She pulled out an ivory envelope tied with a red ribbon, her voice trembling with emotion. "A trip to Europe, all expenses paid. You deserve the best, Amelia. You deserve the world." The people around us clapped. Amelia laughed, radiant, her mouth overflowing with thank yous. I stood right beside her, clutching my diploma, forcing a polite smile, hoping no one would notice the hollow thud in my chest. Then came my turn. Mom turned to me with the same smile, but something in her eyes had cooled. She handed me a smaller, thinner envelope. I opened it and found a $10 Starbucks gift card and a neatly written note that read, "Gratitude makes life richer." Somewhere behind her, Dad said softly, "We just want you to learn to appreciate the little things, Ava. Life isn't always about grand adventures." I smiled barely. Not out of warmth, but because I'd grown used to this kind of division. One child gets the world, the other gets the lesson. I tried to blend into the cheerful atmosphere, listening to Amelia talk about all the places she'd soon visit: Paris, Venice, Zurich, her voice flowing like a melody the whole family wanted to hum along with. I looked down at my hands, the fingertips slightly calloused from endless nights of typing, coding for hours on end to finish projects for MetaView Labs. These were the same hands that had paid every single mortgage bill for the house. They were standing in the little brick house with the white door and the small garden out front. The one they once said, "We'll lose if no one helps." But they didn't remember. Or maybe they never really wanted to. I said nothing. I only tightened my grip on the diploma, feeling the cold from the red leather cover seep into my palm. When the final drumbeat of the ceremony echoed across the yard, the crowd erupted in cheers, caps flying high into the golden sunlight. I looked up, watching hundreds of black squares spinning through the air, and thought about how strange it all was. Amelia and I were born just 1 minute apart, studied under the same roof, wore the same honors cords, yet our lives had somehow been priced at two completely different values. $10 and the world. Lynn. I knew I'd never forget that, feeling sharp and clear all at once. And in that very moment, surrounded by glittering joy and triumphant music, I realized something. This wasn't just my Harvard graduation. It was my graduation from my own family. In my memories, Amelia had always been the light of that house. She had a contagious smile, a clear, effortless voice, and a gift for making people feel lucky just to be around her. I, on the other hand, as everyone liked to say, was the smart but quiet one. When I was younger, I used to think that was a compliment. Until I understood, it was just a gentler way of saying I was never quite lovable enough to be noticed. I remember it so vividly: the piano recital when I was 10. A small room inside our town's art center, the walls lined with framed certificates and old trophies. I played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, each note carefully practiced for weeks. When I finished, I heard Mom's voice from the back row. "You should be softer, Ava. Music isn't math." I nodded, though my throat tightened. Then it was Amelia's turn. She missed a few notes, her hands trembling, but she still ended with that radiant smile of hers. Mom rushed forward, wrapped her in a hug, and said, "That was beautiful, sweetheart. You played with heart." I stood beside them, clutching my sheet music, trying not to show the difference everyone could see but no one would ever say out loud. We were raised to believe that our parents love us both equally. But some truths don't need words, they shine as clearly as sunlight at noon. Amelia was the one chosen to be seen, to tell stories at dinner, to represent the perfect Morgan family Mom liked to brag about. I was the one who made sure the Wi-Fi didn't drop, the printer worked, and the bills were paid on time. When the living room light flickered, Dad called for me, not Amelia. When Mom needed her Apple ID updated, she came to me. When their credit card got declined during online shopping, the one who fixed it was still me. I never complained. Partly because I was used to it, and partly because I thought that was the only way I could ever be noticed, by being useful, not lovable. Amelia always knew how to say the right thing to make people happy. She could turn a mistake into a funny story that made the whole table laugh. Me? Every time I said something true, the air went silent. Once, at a family dinner, Aunt Helen asked what we wanted to be when we grew up. Amelia said brightly, "I want to be an economist and help make the world richer." The table burst into applause. Then I said, "I want to be a software engineer to improve medical data systems." I am. Aunt Helen smiled awkwardly. "Oh, that sounds complicated." Dad chuckled. "She's always been into machines, never much of a girly girl." Everyone laughed. And I laughed too, out of habit, not humor. It was the kind of laugh you give when silence feels too heavy to survive. Those years taught me something painful but clear. In my family, your worth wasn't measured by what you did, it was measured by how you made others feel about themselves. Amelia made them feel proud. I made them feel uneasy. They always said, "We treat both of you equally," but their version of fairness was like a tilted scale, balanced just enough to soothe their conscience, not enough to reflect reality. I still remember one winter evening, Mom arranging flowers in the kitchen. She said, "Ava, you should learn to live more gently, like your sister. You're always so serious." Why? I wanted to tell her that someone had to be serious so this family wouldn't have its power cut off in the middle of a snowstorm. But all I said was, "I'll try, Mom." I started freelancing during my sophomore year, while most of my classmates were still juggling shifts at the library or cafes around Harvard Square. It happened almost by accident. A friend from my research group introduced me to a California-based startup called MetaView Labs, which specialized in artificial intelligence for medical imaging diagnostics. They needed someone to design the user interface for their AI software that read X-rays and MRIs. I sent my portfolio without expecting much. The next morning, they called for an interview. It lasted exactly 12 minutes. A week later, I got an email and offer to join as a remote freelancer for $7,000 a month. It was more than I ever thought a sophomore could earn. I still remember that night sitting in my tiny Winthrop House dorm, staring at the screen as the numbers in my bank account crossed 5 digits for the first time. I didn't scream. I didn't tell anyone. I just smiled. Maybe because I already knew what they would say if I did. "You're lucky, Ava. Don't let it make you arrogant." My work was quiet but steady. I woke up early, attended classes during the day, then coded late into the night. While my friends went to parties, I sat with a cup of cold coffee and hundreds of lines of Python code. But I never felt lonely. For the first time, I felt valuable in a way no comparison could diminish. Every month, MetaView wired the payment on time. I paid my tuition, covered all my expenses, and still had money left over. I didn't spend lavishly. I saved most of it, almost instinctively, like someone who's learned that safety is something you have to build for yourself. Then one day, Dad called, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He said the bank had informed him that the mortgage rate was going up, monthly payments would rise by almost $900. Mom chimed in, half complaining, half blaming. "If your father hadn't invested in those properties in Worcester, we wouldn't be in this mess." I listened quietly, a knot tightening in my chest. The house in Newton was the only one they had left. I knew Dad would never sell it. After hanging up, I opened my laptop, logged into my bank account, and set up a recurring transfer. In the memo line, I typed, Morgan household, Ava contribution. From that day on, every month, $3,200 left my account automatically paying the mortgage on the house they were so desperate to keep. I never told anyone. In the months that followed, Mom would call to chat about fixing the roof or replacing the washing machine. Her voice sounded lighter, almost cheerful again. I thought she knew. I thought maybe, deep down, they felt grateful, but they didn't. Not once did they ask where the money came from. Not once did they say thank you. They just said things like, "It's lucky the bank gave us an extension." Or, "They must have lowered the interest rate." I stayed silent, still sending the payments. I didn't do it for recognition or pity. I did it because I wanted them to see that I had grown up, that I could shoulder part of the weight they once thought I was too serious or rigid to carry. In my mind, it was proof that love didn't need grand gestures. It could exist quietly, through small, unseen acts. But over time, I began to realize that in this family, nothing truly counted unless it looked good from the outside. And if your kindness wasn't bright enough to draw applause, it simply became invisible. I remember once hearing Mom proudly tell a neighbor, "Amelia just landed an internship in New York. She's so talented." I stood there, listening, not angry, not hurt. Just quietly smiling, thinking about the money that continued to flow from my account each month, keeping the very house they were standing in afloat. To me, that secret was both the sweetest and heaviest burden. Sweet because it reminded me I was capable of giving without needing praise. Heavy because it taught me that in this family, kindness was never enough to earn respect. Looking back on that graduation day now, I finally understand. Silence doesn't protect you. It only convinces others they were right to underestimate you. And for years, I had been the one helping them believe that. Back to the present, our graduation dinner was held that very evening, in the same bright, golden-lit dining room where I'd grown up eating family meals my whole life. The table was covered with a white cloth, wine glasses glittering under the chandelier, and a cake in the center that read, in delicate cursive, "Congratulations, Amelia and Ava." Only, the word Amelia was written twice the size. I noticed it immediately, just like I'd noticed 1,000 other small details over the last 24 years. Dinner began with toasts and laughter. Mom talked excitedly about the Europe trip, listing all the cities Amelia has always dreamed of visiting. Dad raised his glass and said how proud he was that both daughters are brilliant, but Amelia clearly has the gift of leadership. I sat there, slicing a small piece of cake, listening to their voices blend into a warm, familiar chorus, and realized I was just a guest at my own family's table. When dessert was nearly finished, Mom turned to me, her tone soft and instructive, like she was offering moral wisdom. "Ava, you should learn to be content with less. Not everyone needs grand things to be happy. Gratitude makes life richer, remember?" She smiled, as if she had just handed me enlightenment. I looked at her, then at Amelia, who was busy taking pictures of her dessert, and I nodded politely. But inside my head, another sentence echoed, calm and sharp. "It's not that I'm not enough. It's that they don't want to see me as more." After everyone left the table, I stayed behind, staring around the house one last time. The old wall clock ticked steadily, just like always, but this time, each tick sounded like a countdown to something about to change. I went upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out my suitcase. Laptop, hard drive, notebook, mortgage transfer receipts. All neatly packed. No tears. No dramatic music. Just absolute silence. The kind that only comes when you've been preparing for this moment your entire life. The early summer nights in Boston still carried a trace of chill. I drove my old car across the Longfellow Bridge, watching the city lights shimmer over the surface of the Charles River. On the other side lay Cambridge, where the glass towers of the MIT Tech District sparkled like a constellation of possibilities. I found a small apartment, third floor of an old brick building, with a window overlooking a quiet street. When I signed the lease, I wrote my name in the firmest handwriting I'd ever used. No more Morgan household. No more memo lines saying contribution. Just Ava Morgan. A single name. An independent person. When I got to the apartment, I opened the windows to let the wind in and began cutting every old tie, one by one. I turned off family iCloud location, changed my banking passwords, updated my email and Apple ID, and revoked every financial access I had once shared. It felt light like unfastening a necklace that had been strangling me for years. I boiled a packet of ramen, sat on the bare wooden floor, the glow from my laptop screen reflecting on my face. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside me was a quiet I had never known before. I opened an old notes document and typed a single line, part promise, part declaration. If they want to learn gratitude, I'll teach them by silence. A week passed since the night I left the Newton house. Every morning, I woke up in that tiny Cambridge apartment, sunlight spilling across the worn wooden floor, the faint sound of the streetcar humming below. I had never seen the Boston sky so blue. No more mom calling me for breakfast. No more mortgage alerts in the family inbox. Everything was still. Clean. As if my life had finally been cut free from all the invisible strings I once mistook for duty. I worked harder than ever. MetaView sent 2 new projects, and I threw myself completely into the code, into data, into the evolving models of AI that once only filled my spare hours. I didn't have to check my parents' account anymore. Didn't have to worry about mortgage deadlines. On Saturday night, I brewed tea, turned on my favorite jazz playlist, and took a deep breath. For the first time, freedom didn't smell like loneliness. It smelled like peace. Then, on Sunday morning, my phone rang. The screen lit up with one word. Mom. I froze for a few seconds before answering. On the other end came the sound of muffled sobs, uneven and broken. Ava, what did you do to the mortgage account? The bank keeps sending alerts. They said this month's payment was cancelled. Ah. I kept my voice calm. I stopped paying, Mom. I don't live there anymore. A long silence followed. Then Dad's voice cut through, low and tight like a wire pulled too hard. What? You can't just do that. We're family. You have an obligation to help. I let out a small laugh, not mocking, just weary. I did help Dad, for 18 months. Now I'm just practicing gratitude, in my own way. On the other end, Mom began crying harder. Dad's voice rose, sharp with anger, accusing me of being ungrateful, of turning my back on family. I didn't argue. I let them speak. Then, quietly, I said, I don't owe anyone anything anymore. I've paid enough. In time, in money, and in faith. And I hung up. The room fell silent again. I sat there for a long while, watching my phone screen glow. Missed calls, Mom 5, Dad 3. Before it finally went dark. I thought I'd feel guilty. But I didn't. What I felt was something else, something unfamiliar, yet deeply calm, peace. For the first time, I wasn't the good daughter, programmed to save everyone. I wasn't the quiet fixer or the invisible provider. I opened the window. The morning breeze slipped through my hair, carrying the faint sound of church bells in the distance. And in that moment, I realized. For the first time in their lives, my silence was loud enough to scare them. Because they had never imagined a world where I stopped paying the price for their comfort. That night, as my phone kept buzzing nonstop, I turned it face down on the table, opened my laptop, and went back to work. Against the pale glow of the code editor, I saw the old memo line flash up. Morgan household, Ava contribution. I hit delete and watched it vanish. A small gesture, but it felt lighter than a breath. That weekend, just after I finished a build for MetaView and was about to brew a pot of peppermint tea, my inbox lit up with a cold subject line. Please confirm request to add joint backup payment to mortgage account, Morgan residence. My heart skipped. I opened it, an email from the bank's servicing department, the loan history laid out with a confirm divided by decline link. At the bottom a note read, if you did not initiate this request, please call within 48 hours to verify. I didn't click any button. I picked up the phone and called directly. The customer service rep's voice was warm and polite as she asked me to verify information. After I read the last 4 digits of my SSN and my address, she said, "We received a request to add a backup payment method linked to the mortgage account of Michael and Diane Morgan. The requester is Michael Morgan. The routing number matches the account previously used for auto-pay your account, Miss Ava." I heard each word as if a button had dropped on the quiet wooden floor. Not accidental, not a mistake. Deliberate. I inhaled and kept my voice steady, asking to be transferred to the electronic transactions team. I asked them to review the history, confirm timestamps, IP addresses, and how the form was submitted. On the line, the specialist read each timestamp, pausing occasionally to log notes. According to the record, the request was initiated via the customer portal under Add Backup Payment Method, sender name, Michael Morgan. The attached note reads, "Maintain timely payments." I stayed silent for a moment. The apartment felt eerily still, only the laptop fan turning softly. Then I said, "I do not authorize this. That account is no longer used to pay the loan. Any attempt to relink it is unauthorized." My voice did not shake. Calmness came naturally, like counting the beats before hitting enter on an important deploy. Immediately after that call, I requested that the old link be frozen and the incident logged as an unauthorized ACH activity. The representative confirmed that all payment method changes would be suspended, a fraud flag would be activated, and I would be issued a case reference number. I read the number back twice, wrote it carefully in my notebook, and asked for a time-stamped confirmation email. I then requested the removal of all authorized users who weren't me from the previous profile and asked that every transaction be restricted to 2-factor authentication under my sole control until the dispute was fully resolved. On the other end, the specialist promised to send a dispute package for e-signature, including a summary of the event and detailed instructions for submitting evidence. When the call ended, I opened my finance folder and dragged every screenshot of the automatic transfers from the past 18 months onto my screen. Each file was labeled with Morgan Household, Ava Contribution, the exact amount, date, and confirmation code. I built a quick spreadsheet. Start date, frequency, end date, and added one final note. Payments stopped after graduation. How was Alvin? I captured the warning email from the bank headers intact, downloaded the PDF confirming the dispute case, and organized everything into a new folder titled Evidence, Morgan House. Inside it, I created subfolders. H. History, bank, emails, call, logs, ID, case, screenshots. My engineer's instincts kicked in. I treated it like a critical system ticket, collecting logs, tagging files, packaging, and backing everything up to an external drive. Then the phone buzzed. Mom. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then let it ring. A message came through right after. "Your father said he only added a backup payment option. It's not a big deal. That's our family home." I set the phone down and turned back to the laptop. I drafted a short email to the bank, polite but firm, confirming that any request to modify payment methods originating from an account, name, or device not belonging to me was done without the account holder's consent. I attached a copy of my ID, my current address, and asked that all primary contact information be updated to me only, with no further notifications forwarded to the family email. Night fell quickly over Cambridge, the streetlights spilling gold across the window glass. I sat upright, fingers resting on the keyboard, and suddenly saw a boundary I'd never been able to name before, now drawn as sharply as if carved in light. For 18 months, I had filled every gap they created, patched every crack, kept that house from collapsing. And now, the moment I pulled my hand back, they weren't just trying to drag me home, they were trying to reconnect the pipeline without asking. This wasn't an administrative error. It was a deliberate attempt to legitimize my dependence. I opened my password manager and reset everything, every bank credential, every login tied to shared access. I enabled multi-layer authentication across all services, deleted unknown devices still signed in. Then I opened my calendar, set a reminder labeled follow-up dispute status for 3 business days later, and added one more note. If needed, transfer all transactions to new bank. When I finished, I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. The room was silent, but not empty. I knew exactly what I was doing and why. Some truths need to be spoken aloud. Others only need to be written down, saved, and left for time to defend. The folder evidence, Morgan House, glowed on my desktop like a small safe. Inside it sat every document, every trace of proof I once thought I'd never need. Now I understood. I was no longer protecting their home. I was protecting my own boundaries. And I chose to face it, to end it on my terms. The next morning, I drove back to Newton under a dull gray sky, the air thick with the heaviness of rain that never quite came. The familiar road into the quiet neighborhood was still lined with tall maples, but everything felt different. Or maybe it was me who'd changed. The house appeared at the end of the street, the front door slightly ajar, Dad's old SUV parked crookedly in the same spot as always, leaning a little to the right. I pulled up to the curb, turned off the engine, and sat still for a few seconds. My heart wasn't racing. There was no fear, just a cold, steady calm. The kind that comes when you've accepted the truth too many times to feel the pain anymore. The door swung open just as I stepped onto the porch. Dad stood there, broad-shouldered as ever, but thinner, hollower somehow. He didn't say hi or "you're home." He just looked at me and said flatly, "We need to talk." I nodded and walked into the living room. Mom sat on the couch, eyes swollen and red. Amelia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her gaze sharp and defensive. The air felt heavy, thick, like each of us was clinging to our own version of being right in utter silence. Dad started first, his voice stretched tight like a wire. "We just want to keep the house, Ava. You know what happens if the bank forecloses? This family will have nowhere to go." I only added a backup payment option for safety. I met his eyes, steady and unblinking. "Safety for who, Dad? For the house or for your sense of control?" His face hardened. "Don't talk like that. This is a family responsibility." I took a slow breath, then spoke each word carefully, evenly. "And I'm trying to keep my dignity." The room froze. Mom lowered her head, her lips trembling, but no sound came out. It was Amelia who broke the silence, her tone tired, dismissive. "Ava, you're blowing this out of proportion." "Dignity? Seriously?" "They're just scared." I turned toward her, no anger, just exhaustion. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am taking it seriously. Because I'm the only one in this family who actually knows what it feels like to pay the price." Amelia's face faltered, the polite smile collapsing completely. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. Dad looked away. Mom dabbed at her tears with a tissue. I stood up and let my eyes wander around the room, the family photo hanging on the wall, the decorative pieces I'd once ordered online and assembled myself, the Wi-Fi router I'd configured so the house would always have a stable connection. Each small detail reminded me that I had built parts of this place, only to end up treated like I never belonged here at all. I walked to the door. No one called after me. No one said a word. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of damp grass after rain. For the first time in years, I didn't cry, not from anger, not from pain. Tears couldn't soothe anything anymore. I got into my car, started the engine, and looked into the rearview mirror. Through the glass, their figures grew smaller, 3 people still standing in the house they fought so hard to keep, never realizing they were losing the only thing that ever truly mattered: trust. I turned the wheel and drove away, leaving the quiet street behind. This time, not to escape, but to never again return as someone who owed them anything. After that confrontation in Newton, I came back to Cambridge with a completely different state of mind. There was no emptiness this time, only a steady calm, the kind that comes after you stop chasing approval from people who were never willing to give it. I poured everything into my work. MetaView Labs started assigning me to major projects optimizing the AI interface for early lung cancer detection, designing user behavior models for diabetes treatment applications. Each project stretched over months, demanding patience, precision, and something I had in abundance: the ability to see structure within chaos. Within 3 months, I landed 3 new contracts, all through internal referrals from medical engineers who had worked with me before. One late night, while working in my small apartment, I received an email from a former client. "Ava, have you ever thought about building your own brand? People here already know your design philosophy, quiet precision." I reread that phrase, quiet precision, 3 times. And suddenly, it hit me. That was exactly who I was. Not loud, but exact. Not flashy, but steady. I founded my own company, Novamind Health Design, a small startup focused on user experience in healthcare technology. I hired 2 other freelancers in the same field and set up a modest office on the 3rd floor of a red brick building near Kendall Square. On the wall, I pinned a sheet of white paper with a handwritten line in thick black marker. "We design clarity for those who save lives." Every morning, I brewed coffee, opened the window, and watched the light spill across the desk as if life itself were beginning again, this time on my own terms. When Novamind signed its first clients, revenue tripled compared to my freelance days. A project with MetaView was transferred directly to me under a company contract, no longer a freelancer for hire, but a founder. I paid off my student loans, bought a smaller apartment in Somerville, bright, tidy, filled only with morning coffee aroma and the quiet whistle of wind through the window. For the first time in my life, I lived without feeling like someone was measuring my worth behind the scenes. Then one day, an email arrived from a health tech investor. He had once spoken at the Harvard Innovation Lab and wrote that he wanted to recommend me for a startup mentorship program. I read the message and smiled faintly. Never in my life had I imagined being invited back to Harvard, not as a student, but as the founder of a healthcare technology company. I went, presented Novamind's vision before a panel of experts. When the presentation ended, the lead judge shook my hand and said, "This is what impact looks like: quiet, but undeniable." As I left the room, my hands trembled, not from nerves, but from emotion. All those solitary hours at the keyboard, all the silence that once made me invisible, were now speaking for me. In the only language that can't be dismissed: results. I never posted anything about it online. My social media stayed simple, just photos of my desk, a laptop, a cup of coffee, a few lines of code running across the screen, sunlight painting the wall. No fancy cars, no travel shots, no obvious symbols of success. But somehow, even simplicity draws attention. One evening, a message came in from Amelia. "Are you working at the Harvard lab? Mom said you are," and I didn't believe her. "You're really doing great." I read it but didn't reply right away. Maybe because deep down, I knew what caught her attention wasn't my achievement. It was the dawning realization that, for the first time, she was no longer the center of our family's orbit. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I just took a slow sip of coffee, watched the code flow across my screen, and smiled. Because I wasn't the same person anymore. I had finally come home to myself. One early autumn afternoon, when the trees around Kendall Square had turned a deep wine red, I heard a soft knock on the door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised, just paused for a beat. Amelia stood there, wrapped in a camel-colored coat, hair neatly tied, a designer tote hanging from her arm. Her face looked thinner, the makeup unable to hide the fatigue beneath. She glanced around my small apartment, her eyes flickering with quiet surprise. Maybe she'd imagined I lived in loneliness and cold, not among potted plants and warm light. "Are you busy?" she asked softly. I gestured for her to come in. She sat across from my desk, fingers interlaced, silent for a long moment before speaking. "Mom's sick," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Too stressed, she can't sleep. Dad, the doctor says he's showing signs of depression. They're about to lose the house, Ava. The bank sent a foreclosure notice." "Oh." I listened without interrupting. The only sound in the room was the steady tick of the clock. Amelia continued, maybe because the silence unnerved her. "You know, everything fell apart after you left. Mom says you broke the family. Dad says if you'd kept helping like before, things wouldn't have gotten this bad. Then she looked at me, eyes caught somewhere between accusation and pleading. Ava, you're destroying this family. I took a deep breath, sat up straight, and looked at her, the person who had shared everything with me since the day we were born, now speaking in the tone of a stranger. No, Amelia, I said slowly, each word measured, calm. I didn't destroy anything. You're just witnessing the consequences of not knowing how to appreciate what you had. She froze, lips parting but no sound coming out. For a brief second, something flickered in her eyes, maybe anger, maybe shame, or maybe the faint recognition of a truth she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Her voice softened, almost retreating. You've changed. I smiled, a small, quiet smile tinged with sadness. No, I just stopped paying for love. Amelia didn't respond. She just sat there, eyes lowered toward the cup of tea I'd poured for her. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, the curtain trembling, light flickering gently across the wooden floor. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. Between us stretched a kind of invisible distance, not made of blood, but of years in which one person was loved for showing up the right way, while the other carried the silent weight that kept everything standing. After a few minutes, Amelia stood up. She said quietly, I'll tell Mom and Dad you don't want to help anymore. I shook my head. You don't need to say anything, they'll understand if they're willing to look. She nodded faintly, then turned and walked toward the door. When it closed behind her, I stood by the window, watching her figure grow smaller along the leaf-covered street. I didn't feel triumph, only release. There were no tears, no hugs, no neat reconciliation. Just truth bare, unpolished, but necessary. For the first time, I wasn't the rescuer. I was simply myself. In my own space, with a cup of tea still warm in my hands, and a peace so quiet, it almost hummed. One early winter morning, when Boston was wrapped in a thin layer of fog, I started receiving a flood of unfamiliar notifications. Each message was a screenshot from the family's Facebook page, relatives commenting, arguing, leaving rows of exclamation marks and question marks. I opened one image. It was a snapshot of my parents' bank statement showing the monthly mortgage payments. And in the memo line, clear as day, Morgan household, Ava contribution. Below the picture, Aunt Helen's caption screamed in all caps. Unbelievable. Ava paid their mortgage for over a year and a half and no one in the family said a word. I sat there in silence for a few seconds, then exhaled slowly. I knew I hadn't sent that file by mistake, but maybe fate had a better sense of timing than I did. A few days earlier, I'd attached that same document while preparing my tax materials, intending to ask my accountant to double-check the transaction details. I hadn't realized that, while cleaning my inbox, I accidentally dragged Helen Morgan, family group, into the CC field. One small click enough to unravel everything. The family chat exploded. From Newton to Concord, phones rang nonstop, messages piled in. Some were shocked. Ava did all that and they never mentioned it? Some were furious. What kind of parents let their daughter pay the mortgage? And others tried to defend them. Oh, come on. Diane probably didn't mean any harm. Maybe she thought it was just family responsibility. But it didn't matter. Whether they defended or condemned, the story had already escaped their control. That evening, my mother called. Her voice trembled, part anger, part panic. Ava, what did you do? You could have just stopped helping, but how could you tell the whole family? I replied, my tone calm and even. I didn't tell anyone anything, Mom. I just told the truth through the numbers I transferred myself. Silence filled the line for several seconds before she hung up. 2 days later, Dad called. This time his voice was heavy, stripped of its usual authority. Do you know this has spread to church now? People are whispering, saying we took advantage of you. I've lost face with my friends. What did you gain from doing this? I closed my eyes, wondering if he even heard the words coming out of his mouth. Dad, I said slowly. The only thing I did was stop covering it up. And if the truth embarrasses someone, That's not my fault. Rumors spread faster than anyone could have imagined. At the church where my mother volunteered, people whispered about the Morgan house, the home their daughter had secretly been paying for nearly 2 years. Some old neighbors messaged me. Ava, I had no idea you did so much for them. They're lucky to have you. I read their messages but didn't reply. I didn't want this to turn into a public spectacle. I just wanted to let the truth speak for itself quietly, inevitably. And then, the inevitable happened. The bank sent a letter denying the refinance request, citing unstable payment history after the primary funding source ceased. A contact from the finance industry forwarded me the scanned letter. The Newton house would be repossessed sooner or later. I didn't feel joy. Not even a hint of it. What I felt was a strange kind of stillness. The kind that lingers after a storm finally passes, leaving broken branches glinting under soft sunlight. That evening, I stepped out onto my small balcony in Somerville and watched the city lights blur through the mist. I thought about my parents. How they were probably sitting in their living room, surrounded by boxes and silence, in the house they once vowed to keep at all costs. Maybe they were on the phone with the bank, trying to negotiate, trying to salvage the last shreds of their pride. But to me, the real loss wasn't the house. It was the one thing they had always treated as disposable. The trust of the person who once carried them in silence. I stood there for a long time, the cold wind brushing against my shoulders, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need to win. All I wanted was to see the truth in full view. Without excuses, without the glossy varnish of a perfect family. And in that moment, I knew. No matter what anyone lost, at least now, each of us was living in reality. No illusions left to cling to. After everything that had happened, I ran into my mother one late winter afternoon. Boston was cold and damp, the kind of chill that felt like rain seeping up from the ground itself. I parked outside the Whole Foods in Cambridge, where the yellow light glowed softly through the thick glass, warm and hazy against the icy wind. I only meant to pick up a few things for the week: vegetables, oatmeal, peppermint tea, and head home to finish the Nova Mind Fellowship proposal. My life had become tidy, structured, peaceful. So much so that sometimes even I didn't realize how far I'd traveled. From the chaos that once defined me. Inside the store, the soft white light spread evenly across the aisles. People moved slowly, the gentle scrape of shopping carts against the tiled floor blending with the low hum of background music. I stood by the organic produce section, leaning down to choose a bundle of bok choy, feeling the faint morning dew still clinging to its leaves. My mind was elsewhere, thinking about my upcoming talk. TEDx Harvard Medical Innovation had just confirmed the date. I would speak about independence, about quiet precision, about the strength of women who choose to walk away when their kindness is taken for granted. I smiled to myself at the thought, until a voice, fragile and trembling, broke through the calm behind me. Ava? I froze. My name spoken softly, yet heavy enough to make my entire body still. I straightened up and turned around. And my heart sank. It was Mom. She stood just a few steps away, holding an empty shopping basket. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her thick gray coat couldn't hide how thin she'd become. Her once dark hair was streaked with silver. And on her face, new lines gathered like tiny rivers branching from her eyes. Those eyes, the same ones that had watched me leave for school every morning, were now shadowed with deep circles, dark as spilled ink. She looked at me for a long moment, then took a hesitant step closer, her voice shaking. Ava. I'm sorry. No other words were needed. I knew instantly that this was the moment she'd been avoiding for an entire year. I stayed still, my hand tightening around the basket's handle. Every muscle in my body froze, not from anger, stun, after.com, but from a swirl of something harder to name. Pity, shock, and an odd kind of peace. Mom bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her voice cracked. I treated you like the family's wallet. I know that now. I was wrong. So wrong, Ava. Each word fell heavy, slow. as if every syllable carried the weight of all the years we had lost. I tried to remember the last time my mother had ever said I was wrong. But I couldn't. Maybe she never had. I looked at her, the woman who once could silence an entire room with a single glance, now trembling under the fluorescent lights between shelves of produce. There were only a few steps between us, but it felt like an ocean. I took a slow breath. "Mom, I've already forgiven you," I said quietly. "But I'm not coming back." My voice wasn't raised, it wasn't cold either. It was steady, simple, but enough to make her tears fall faster. She shook her head, her thin fingers gripping the empty basket handle. "I don't want you to come back," she whispered. "I just need you to know I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I never thought it would go this far. The house, it's gone. Your father. He's different now. Everything." Her voice broke. "Everything fell apart after you left." I said nothing. I just watched her shoulders tremble, her hands clinging to that empty basket as if letting go would make the rest of her life crumble, too. I wanted to say something, but stopped myself. There was no need. No word could rescue or punish anymore. The silence itself was enough. A few shoppers passed by, pushing their carts slowly, glancing at us, two women standing motionless between aisles, one crying, one still. Then they turned away, back to their lives. The world doesn't stop for anyone. And strangely, that thought made me feel lighter. Mom stepped closer and reached out, her fingertips brushing my hand. Her skin was cold and papery. I didn't pull away. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she murmured again, barely above a whisper. "I should never have let it happen. I should have protected you, not the other way around." End of cry. I looked at that hand, the same one that used to tie my hair before school, the same one that once signed the loan papers I quietly paid off. And then, I gave her hand a small, firm squeeze. Not as comfort, but as understanding. "I know, Mom," I said softly. "And I truly hope you find peace, wherever that is." We stood there for a while. No one sobbed. No one embraced. Only our breaths filled the space between us. A quiet that no longer carried bitterness. No longer heavy with guilt. Only the simple weight of acknowledgement. When she let go of my hand, I watched her walk toward the checkout line. She looked so small, swallowed up by that oversized gray coat that seemed to hang heavier than her frame could bear. Halfway there, she stopped and turned back. For a brief second our eyes met. Then she gave a faint nod, perhaps a quiet greeting, or maybe a long overdue goodbye. I stood still for a long time. From the ceiling speakers came the soft hum of Moon River, the song the store always played near closing time. The melody floated through the air like mist, wrapping everything in a haze of gentle melancholy that made my chest tighten. I looked around. The aisles, bright and full of color. Strangers passing with calm, indifferent faces. The white lights above. The warm scent of fresh bread drifting through the air. A perfectly ordinary world. And I realized for the first time in years, silence no longer hurt. I set my basket back on the counter, leaving it there. No groceries, no hesitation. Stepping outside, the cold air hit me hard, but I didn't pull my coat tighter. I just kept walking through the glowing parking lot, past the stream of people rushing home. I didn't know where Mom was driving, and I didn't need to. That encounter, brief as it was enough. Because I understood now. Forgiveness isn't about returning. It's about letting go. So you're no longer held hostage by what once broke you. It's when you can look at the person who hurt you and feel no tremor of fear left in your chest. It's when you can say, "I forgive you," and know that those words don't need to prove anything anymore. On the drive home, the city lights streaked past the windshield, reflecting across my face in the rearview mirror. And there, I saw someone different. Still me, but quieter, clearer. No longer the daughter waiting to be seen. But a woman who had already proven her worth. Not by staying, but by walking away. When I pulled up in front of my building, I smiled, small, certain. And in the heart of a noisy city, I finally felt something I hadn't dared believe in for years. I was free. A year later, I walked onto the stage of TEDx Harvard Medical Innovation, a place where I once only dreamed of sitting quietly in the audience, listening to someone else speak. The lights shone down, hundreds of faces looked up, and in the center of it all I saw myself. No longer the introverted student hiding behind a laptop, but a woman who had learned to stand steady in the light of her own making. That day, my talk wasn't about technology. It was about what had brought me here, the journey toward independence. I spoke about the years spent choosing between love and self-respect, about how kindness, even when unrecognized, still matters, because it defines who we are, not how others see us. I said, some people learn gratitude by receiving. I learned it by stopping my giving when those I gave to stopped valuing it. For a moment, the room went completely still. Then came the applause, loud, rising, and sincere. It wasn't just approval, it was confirmation. That my voice, once dismissed as too quiet to matter, had finally found its echo. After the talk, Novamind Health Design officially launched the Novamind Fellowship, a scholarship program supporting women in health technology, especially those paying their own way through school or under financial pressure from family. I named it after my own memories. Those long nights coding alone in a tiny room, believing that silent effort still meant something, even if the world didn't notice right away. I wanted young women to never have to choose between dreams and duty, between being a good daughter and being free. I wanted them to have the kind of beginning I never did. That evening, after the interviews and congratulatory emails were done, I went home to my apartment in Boston. The city glowed against the night sky, the lights reflecting on the Charles River like shards of broken glass turned to gold. I stood by the window, a warm cup of tea in hand. On the wall between Novamind's blueprints and certificates hung a small glass frame. Inside it sat the $10 Starbucks gift card from graduation day, the one with silver lettering. Gratitude makes life richer. Once, it had felt like the deepest cut of my life. Now, it hung beside the Novamind logo. A quiet reminder of how far I had come. A symbol of work, of independence, of a journey that turned pain into power. I looked at that little card for a long time, a faint smile forming on my lips. And in my mind, a voice spoke slow, steady, no longer bitter, only clear and calm. I did learn gratitude. Just not the way they tried to teach me. Outside, Boston shimmered under its winter lights. The wind drifted across the Charles, carrying with it the crisp scent of a new season. I took a sip of tea, warmth spreading through my chest. Life no longer felt like a competition. No more comparisons, no need for validation. Because in the end, gratitude isn't about learning how to bow your head. It's about knowing when to lift it and smile at the person you've become. Through my own story, I want to speak to anyone who's ever had to leave their own family just to be seen as a person. You are not selfish. You're simply choosing to live honestly. Some houses are filled with laughter but lack respect. Some relationships wear the name family, but demand that you shrink yourself just to fit in. Leaving doesn't mean you stop loving. It means you've learned to love yourself enough. Not to stay where you have to ask permission to exist. Sometimes, distance is the only thing that teaches people the value of what they once took for granted. And if you're somewhere out there right now, walking your own lonely, honest path, remember this. You're not alone. Because sometimes, it's in solitude that we finally rediscover the truest sound of our own soul. Thank you for staying with me to the very end of my story. If you believe someone out there needs to hear this too, please like, share, and subscribe. So, together, we can keep spreading the quiet strength of those who dare to stand up and choose themselves.